everywhere I go, I have too much stuff. When I travel, my husband makes fun of me for how many suitcases I take with me wherever I go. And even here, when I'm coming into the Dharma Center, I still have too many things. But at least I have both a cup of tea, and some kind person got me a water, so I'm going to be hydrated, which, seems to be the theme of the day. How many weeks of drought did we have, and now we're getting, anyway. So in any case, good morning to everyone, and thank you for being here today. I know that there are lots of other places you could be on any given Sunday morning, but I appreciate the fact that you decided to spend some time with us and bring your goodness and sincerity to this place, because I like to acknowledge that when I begin a talk, that we all come here for different reasons. Come to sit and meditate, come to find community, come to be in a space, that's got some sacredness to it. These are the reasons we come here. But we bring something as well. And what we bring is our sincere wish to be part of community, our sincere wish to quiet our mind and to live from a place that's contemplative and conscious. So I just want to welcome you in that spirit to be with us today, so thank you. The topic today is a continuation of the last 2 weeks. I decided that since a lot of folks were saying to me that they had some apprehension about the national elections that happened last week, some people came to me with saying they had some feelings of apprehension. So I did a talk a couple of weeks ago about dealing with anger and fear. And then last week, Eric Weinberg gave us some meditations that we could use to work with our minds and our being. And so then today, I want to talk a little bit, I want to sort of round everything up, with talking about working with feelings of adversity and feelings of elation, because that's kind of what we saw this past week. And we saw people whose candidate won office, and they're incredibly elated. They're very happy. They're saying things like, oh gosh, I'm so relieved that my candidate won. And I've met and talked with people, on the other hand, who say, my candidate lost, I am so scared, I don't know what's going to happen. And so we have these two polar opposite feelings among people I've spoken to this week. And so because we're all feeling like this is a moment when we can actually begin to understand each other in a way we might not have before, and find a way to think about each other first. Because thinking about people is how everything starts, with our words and actions. And so there's before I get into the teaching, we'll do a prayer. But in the book, The Great Path of Awakening, there's a little discussion about this, of how thoughts lead to words and actions, and how being aware of that process of thoughts leading to words and actions, how being aware of that and trying to, in our own small way, sit in the driver's seat and drive that bus. That's kind of what my hope is, that we can learn how to drive that bus today of our own thoughts and feelings and actions. So wish us luck. In the Buddhist tradition, we often begin any endeavor with a statement of intention. And so this intention is the intention of looking to the Buddha as the teacher, his teaching is the path, and his community is our community. And so we'll begin by reciting this prayer 2 times in English, and then the last I'll lead a chanted version in the language it was written in, just so we can feel a little of that blessing. Starts with the words in the Buddha. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Okay, so now I'll lead the chant in Tibetan. You can listen or join in. O Sanje Chudang Soji Chodnamla Jang Chu Pardu Dani Kyap Suchi Daji Jin Soji Be Sunam Ki Trola Penshir Sanjay Truparasho. Okay, thanks very much. I'll start with a short prayer of my own, praying for the guidance of the masters of the lineage. O Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Tagi Chiwar Pede Ten Shula Kadrin Jembo Gone Je Sumte Kusum Tugging a Drup Sal to Soul. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this week, and as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, that I've spoken to people on both sides of what is becoming the national and local political divide, and the people whose candidate won, they're very happy. They feel like a burden has been lifted from their shoulders and an era of peace and prosperity is about to begin. And then the people whose candidate lost are likewise feeling something, and their feelings are more concern, fear, and so on, that some of the freedoms that they had and enjoyed, they may no longer have. Everybody, and of course, because we have the capacity as human beings to express ourselves, and that expressing ourselves is part of how we cope with the feelings that we have, then you'll see these feelings in newspapers, on websites, on social media platforms. You'll see a little bit of everything. People expressing their jubilation, people expressing their sorrow, and so there's a lot of emotion in the air right now. And so one of the teachers of our tradition, one of the young masters of our tradition, the eminent teacher, Kalu Rinpoche, he's a young man, I believe he's in his 30s. I met him when he was 4 years old, but let's not go into that. He blessed me 3 times because he kept forgetting to do things. Anyway, it was beautiful. But he's all grown up now, and he's teaching Dharma to a new generation of Buddhist practitioners, and it's really a joy to watch him teach and to see how he zeroes in on the most essential thing to say. What is the most essential thing? Because people like me, I'm not an enlightened being, and I don't even play one on TV. I'm just as confused as everybody else, and I'm trying to make my way and cope just like everybody else. But I feel like one thing I've got on board is I've got my teacher's words, the things my own teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, said to me. And so I'll try and share a few of those with you today, but I wanted to start with this quotation from the young Kalu Rinpoche, because his students were asking him, well, what do we do? What do we do? How should we be? Because we're feeling all the feels, we're feeling everything. And he said that he understood this. He said, but do your best not to react. Not to react to whatever is going on in your mind. And by that, it's like, I think he was getting at like what we in English call the knee-jerk reaction of like the hot take. Is that a thing? Yeah. The instant reaction, the instant blurting out of one's thoughts and feelings, and the passion we feel, we blurt it out. And he's saying, try your best to sort of be reserved on this. He said, because reactions, especially if they're big, can lead other people into reactions that are big. And then it's like pouring gasoline on a fire that you're trying to put out. and some people will hear that and think that they might have a reaction to that kind of advice and think, well, that's not realistic. Are you telling me not to feel what I feel? And the answer is no, because I know where his advice is coming from. His advice is coming from the first words of the Buddha's teachings that were shared in the collection of sayings called the Dhammapada, where he says, we are what we think. I mean, that's powerful. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts, we make the world. We make it. And by that, he means our internal world. We can't make the external world just now, but we can make the internal world with these thoughts. And then the Buddha goes on to say, if we think, speak, and act with an impure mind, suffering follows us just as surely the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. And then he repeats the statement again, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. And then he says, if we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, happiness will follow us like a shadow that is unshakable. And so in this very brief introduction to the Buddha's teachings, we're hearing and seeing why we're being asked to calm ourselves during this moment. Because if we think, speak, and act with an impure mind, then we bring trouble to ourselves and to others. And if we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, then we'll bring goodness to ourselves and others. Now you may say, but where does political action fall in that? Where does protest and demonstration and shouting in the square, where does all that belong? I'll get there. I'm just talking about our mind first, because the mind is the author of all. Our body doesn't like accidentally hit someone. It doesn't work like that. Our mind directs our thoughts. Our mind directs our words. Our mind directs our actions. So we are sort of responsible. So it's like if anybody in this room got a driver's license and learned to drive a car, you kind of know what this is like, because you've been given basically a lethal weapon, and you're put behind the wheel of this lethal weapon, and you're asked to be safe with it, with all the feelings that you have, right? And all of the bad things that can happen on the road, people being rude and mean and cutting you off in traffic and turning in front of you and everything. All kinds, and you're being given this incredible responsibility. Well, in a way, the other incredible responsibility is this body and mind that we have. We can do anything with it. We can do a lot of stuff with it. But we're being asked to consider and to be present with what we are deciding to do, and to consider deeply what we are going to use this body and mind for. And so that's what the Buddha is talking about in those first words, And then he presents, I'll explain one more part of it, which is that after that, the Buddha in his teaching sets up a scenario where he imagines a person talking. So this imaginary person that he imagines talking is saying, look how that person beat me and abused me. Look how that person threw me down and robbed me. So he's imagining a person who's thinking like that. And then he says, live with such thoughts and you live in hate. I know that's harsh, but if we live with these thoughts, we live in hate. And then he repeats, because, a lot of the sutras are repetitive. If anybody's ever read them, you'll know that the Buddha's sutras were meant to be memorized and recited, so there's a lot of repetition and a lot of rhythmic repetition. Then he says the same little topic again. Look how he beat me and abused me. Look how he threw me down and robbed me. And then he gives his advice. He says, abandon such thoughts and live in love. And then he says a statement that is so powerful, it has been repeated century after century. He said, hate never once dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. And then he concludes the section by addressing his reader, saying, you too shall pass away. And knowing this, how can you quarrel? And so I feel like we've got all human beings have a redemption mission that we're supposed to go on at this point. Because through various forces, many of which are outside of us, human beings in this place where we are living have been told to dislike one another. And this week I had to explain to a high school class for the very first time, who had never heard the phrase, what a zero-sum game is. The zero-sum game, for those of you who took a social science class in school, is the feeling that if I win, you have to lose. And it's either you or me. Either I'm going to win or you're going to win. And it's going to be me, because if I win, I take everything. And if you win, you take everything, and I'll be reduced. So this zero-sum game, I had to explain it to a high school group. That was really fun. And then I said to the teacher, you got some work to do. And I said, and also, when I was in 4th grade in Catholic school, hi, Sister Ruth. I'm sorry. I became a Buddhist priest. I'm sorry. Anyway, when I was in the 4th grade, I had activist Dominican nuns. These guys were activists. You know what they did? They taught us how to see the lies in advertising. And we're in the 4th grade. We're in the 4th grade, and they're teaching us, this is how you lie with advertising. And this is why propaganda is not good. And we're like, we're in the 4th grade, for heaven's sakes. We're 9. But, it's a good way to be introduced to how the world works, to find out how people manipulate others using speech and so forth. So I feel like I'm pretty lucky, because I came up and I had to talk to this group of high school students about Buddhism last week, and suddenly it kind of came up that they didn't know any of this. And I said, I think, I said to the teacher, you might have a couple more units to teach here, on the zero-sum game and how to lie with advertising. Anyway, sorry, that was a little off topic, but not really, because where we are right now is on this redemption mission, and we have to redeem ourselves from hate and anger, right? And we have to try to reassure and be present with other people right now. I am jumping to the conclusion of my talk, I know. But in broad strokes, that's where I think we could, that's one path we could take that would be in keeping with what the Buddha said. Hate never once dispelled hate, only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master who lived in the 1960s, 1970s, and he just passed away a couple years ago, used that phrase a lot in his work for social justice. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King also used that exact same phrase, which he had heard from Thich Nhat Hanh. And he and Thich Nhat Hanh had talked about nonviolent protest and nonviolent action, social action. And that was where they landed. Hate never once dispelled hate. And so Martin Luther King reformulated that and spoke it to his followers, and they began to speak it, and they began to speak in it. And so it's really interesting to see this teaching from 2,500 years ago continue to proliferate around the world. And so I feel that the redemption mission that we're on first is redeeming ourselves. And part of the way we can do that is by doing exactly what the young Kala Rinpoche is advising, which is watch your mind. Just watch your mind. Be aware of what's going on in your mind. Be aware of what makes you boil, what makes you boil. Also be aware of what frightens you. And be aware of what makes you angry, and upset. And be aware of these things, and then be self-honest. It's really two parts. We have to be aware of what we're thinking, which is why meditation is so valuable to us. It's why we come here to meditate every week, because otherwise our reactions are going to be knee-jerk reactions. If we haven't had the experience of sitting on a cushion and questioning a thought that has arisen while we're attempting to rest on the breath. We arrest our attention on the breath, and it stays there for a very short period of time, and then it wanders into the past, or it wanders into the future. There's, it is wandering, and then our job is to notice it. We can even label it thinking, and then we can return the attention with so much gentleness and love for ourselves. So much gentleness, so little judgment, and so much gentleness. Bring our attention back to the breath and think of it as a fresh start. So this is what meditation gives us, the ability to see our thoughts in perspective, in context, and to learn how to, even if it's just for a moment, how to let them go and return. Remember, I'm always quoting my friend Dr. Julie Brzezinski-Lewis, who I just call Dr. Julie because it's easier. Dr. Julie, the brain scientist, she said that moment when you notice you're not meditating, and then you gently bring your attention back to the breath for a fresh start, she said that's where the new neural pathways in your brain get created. That is where it happens. It's exactly where the change in your brain happens. And so our ability to do that on the meditation seat allows us to be with situations that are difficult. Maybe we can't be with situations that are difficult 100% of the time. And sometimes our thoughts, words, and actions will get away from us. But as my friends in 12-step like to say, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. When we notice, and so this self-awareness that we get from meditation is what allows us to notice our thoughts, take responsibility for them, and redirect them where we can. Which is why the young Kala Rinpoche says, watch your mind. See what's happening in your mind and work with what's happening in your mind. And I feel like this is what we can do for self-redemption, to be with what our feelings and thoughts are and to work with them. And if we're feeling elated because our candidate won, Well, that's great, but just being elated like that might make you feel superior to somebody else and make you feel like you could hurt them or push them down. Don't do that. If you're happy that your candidate won, wonderful. Just come back to the breath. Come back to the breath and think, how is the other person feeling? How can I be present with my friends who are frightened? How can I do that? And when we cease believing in the zero-sum game, we'll have that little measure of compassion for that other person. We won't see them as an enemy. And this is actually the most radical thing we can do right now. The most radical thing we can do right now is see them as human, see them as suffering, and see them as objects for our compassion. That doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about truth. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to say, this is not the society I want. But I still feel like this is the time to resurrect Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh's methodology and find ways to reach out to and be with other people. I don't know how, because I'm not gifted that way. I just know what the teachings say we should be trying. We're all going to have to figure that out in our own way, but I got a feeling we've got a few examples that will help. And the first is nonviolence. The second is to be present with our own feelings and see our own feelings in others and feel some compassion there. His Holiness the 17th Karmapa spoke about this. He said, a lot of the times when we feel opposition with someone, he said, we're forgetting something. We only think about they're wrong, I'm right. I'm superior to them because I'm right and they're wrong. And that's what everybody is thinking these days. They're right, I'm wrong, and I'm better than them because of that. He said, but what you have to kind of do is disengage from that a minute and ask, who or what is your common enemy? You actually possess a common enemy. And that common enemy is wrong-headed anger. Is this anger? That is your enemy. And it's the enemy of both of you. Because when we get co-opted by anger, we do bad things to ourselves. I mean, our blood pressure goes up. We have all those nasty chemicals released in our body when we're feeling angry, and so forth and so on. So we know that anger, in a way, is our enemy. Yes, it can, if we have this immediate feeling of anger, that alerts us that something important is happening and that we need to pay attention. But it doesn't mean that we have to keep feeding the anger, because this is partly how the modern propaganda machine has kept everybody divided by saying, you hate each other, don't you? And isn't it smart to hate each other? And these guys are really bad, and they're not really even human, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm wondering if there's another way to go that's based on this connection to people individually. Because we all have people in our circle, and I think if your circle is like mine, you've got a little bit of everything. We've got some people on this side of politics, some people on this side, some people voted for this candidate, some people voted for that candidate, and we have to try to be with both of them. And so the idea is that find that place where you can be with them. And it usually revolves around caring on a one-to-one basis, So the redemption of society may not happen because there's so many forces that are trying to push us apart. I wish that would strengthen our resolve to be a light instead of trying to be some kind of sword of retribution, I'd like to see us be a light instead of showing a different way rather than being retribution or revenge or anything like This is how I've been processing with people this week and saying, if you're elated because you're candidate one, think about the people who are suffering right now and don't say bad things to them. Don't do a celebration dance in front of them. Like, oh, my candidate won. You guys are stupid. Which I'm seeing some people act that way. If your candidate won, terrific. But here's the thing, we have to think about other people, which is great because it's very subversive to think about other people. Isn't it weird when it's radical to think of other people with love? Jesus, thank you for talking about that. I hope people start to listen. Buddha, thank you for talking about that. I hope we all continue to listen. So the redemption of society may not happen because there are so many forces that are pushing us apart. But the examples that I have seen this week in that vast wasteland that is social media, vast wasteland. Okay, anybody from my generation will remember Marshall McLuhan, the media analyst, who called television a vast wasteland. And so now it's social media. But the medium is the message. Anyway, but I saw on the vast wasteland of social media this week a post that I apologize to the person for sharing it without their consent, but I also didn't use their name, and I won't use it again now because I don't want anybody to be upset one way or the other. But my friend, who's a high school teacher on the East Coast, said that she had a lot of immigrant children come to her this week in tears, fearful because of what other students were saying to them. Like, oh, too bad you're not going to be here. Too bad you're getting deported. And as though it was a victory dance, And then they have tears in their eyes saying, will my parents have to leave? Will I have to leave? What's going to happen? We're so scared. And it makes me sad that some people eat their fear for breakfast. That just makes me really sad. That some people delight in their fear. That makes me really sad. And that just makes me sad. I can't say more than that. It's incredibly sad because that person is just putting those people who do that, they're putting their hearts under a bushel or under the ground. I don't know which it is. One, it might be retrievable. The other, I'm not sure. And she said, and what she did was that she said that the way she responded to them, to these frightened kids coming to her, was by saying, what do we do in this classroom? Because this goes all the way back to what the rules of the classroom that they established, this teacher established at the beginning of the year. What do we do in this classroom? And the student repeated, because they had learned it, we take care of each other. And that's what then the teacher replied, that is exactly right. We take care of each other. And so I feel like that, for me, is the best piece of advice I've heard this week, the two best pieces of advice I've heard. And then I got another one yesterday. The first piece of advice is watch your mind, tame your reactions. Try to change your reactions to feeling compassion for other people and for yourself. Watch your reactions. Don't react in anger especially, because it poisons the mind. That was the first thing that really helped me. The second was this teacher's advice, we take care of each other. What are we going to do? We're going to take care of each other. We're going to support each other. We're going to lift each other up. And then as the candidate who lost the election this week ended their address with 4 words. I wrote them down because my memory's not so good. optimism, faith, truth, and service. Works for me. Optimism, faith, truth, and service. I like it. It's something that we can dedicate ourselves to, right? Because that's how we take care of each other. We take care of each other with optimism. We take care of each other with faith. We take care of each other with truth. We take care of each other with service. This is how we take care of each other. So, and to recognize that our common enemy is our tendency to reach for anger thinking it's a solution. That is our common enemy. And so maybe we can say to people, you know, all of the division and anger is making me tired. Could we do something else? Could we stop? One of the more interesting articles I've read about history, because I'm a nut, I'm a history nut. I was a journalism major, and I wrote as a daily newspaper reporter for 15 years before I got this job. And so I'm really keyed into history. And a historian wrote an article saying, oh, you think we're divided now? Let's go back to the 1880s. Same thing was happening, exactly the same, down to the competing media outlets, competing versions of reality. It happened before. And of course, the interviewer says, how did they fix it? How did they fix it? And they said, well, for one thing, they didn't have social media. So we're at a disadvantage already. Over the 1880s, we're a little bit of a disadvantage because they didn't have instantaneous social media. Although I read a great article about how they could fix that too. But anyway, has to do with the algorithm and making sure that the people who post on social media are real people. Just, not bots controlled by somebody else. Anyhow, but this person said it was solved by the younger generation. They solved it. The older generation, they were stuck in their place. They were stuck in their hatred. But the younger generation basically said, we're tired of this and we're not doing this anymore. So we're not going to do what you guys are doing. And that's how they solved it, was that they outgrew it because they hated it. And they didn't want to live their lives like that. They just said, nope, we've had enough. And in a way, that's why the idea of love and goodness and service and so forth is so subversive, because it overthrows the people who are trying to divide us. So, it's worth thinking about. Especially when you're old like me, and if I would go out to do a demonstration, I think I would have a problem because my back hurts, and standing for too long, it's just not quite up, Somebody asked Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, is demonstration good? Should you go out and demonstrate in the streets? And he said, depends on your mind. If you can do it while loving the people you're protesting, sure. But if you find yourself getting carried away with hatred, he says, you better think about it. And then I explained this to one of my friends who graduated from 3-year retreat with me. And she said, oh, I got the perfect protest sign. And she sent me a picture. I wish I could find it now, because it was during the last Women's March in 2017 or whatever. It said, no, it's not this one. It's on the other sheet of paper. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have that great happiness which is freedom from suffering. May they dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. It's the four immeasurables. The prayer that the actor playing His Holiness, the Dalai Lama in the movie Kundun, was chanting over and over again in the scene where he's watching and seeing his country fall under totalitarian rule. And he's looking, it's a symbolic scene, whether it really happened or not. This young man, 14, 15 years old, is watching through his telescope that he learned to love the world through. And he's seeing everything, everywhere, and all the destruction. And he's reciting that prayer over and over and over again in Tibetan. And I recognized that that was what it was, and I'm like, what a brilliant choice. What a brilliant choice. When you can't do anything else, make that aspiration. And it lifts you up, and it lifts you out of hatred. So, I said there was one more piece of advice that I got, which is really kind of good. First piece of advice was watch your mind, tame your reaction. Second piece of advice was we take care of each other. Third piece of advice came from Pema Chodron, who, if you know Pema Chodron, you'll know that she is an amazing interpreter of Buddhism for the modern day. And she writes a lot about adversity. And the first of her published books that I remember, I may not be right about this, but the first of her published books that I received was called Start Where You Are. And the opening sentence came to mind to me today. And I'm going to maybe misquote it, but it's something like, we already have everything we need. We already have everything we need. And why does she say that? She said, we don't need to import love and compassion from elsewhere. We've got it. We don't have to import wisdom from some other place. We've got it. We just need to nurture it and to make it grow. We already have what we need. Just let's recognize it, steep ourselves in it, nurture it, and let it grow. And then before we go to questions, because I want to have some discussion, I also thought yesterday at the last minute about this book. This book is called Vivid Awareness. I'm not necessarily recommending that people read it, but the picture on the cover is brilliant. It shows a Buddhist monastic in a black and white photograph looking up at the sky while holding a ritual dagger pointed toward his own heart. And you may say, that's a weird image. That's a weird, weird, weird image. And it has to do with something that happened in the summer of 1957. The summer of 1957 was 2 years before the uprising in Tibet against communist rule. And a lot of Tibetans knew that something was coming because the Chinese army was showing up everywhere. And they didn't know what to do. And this particular master, whose name was Khenpo Gongshar, he had a sense of what was coming because he's probably an enlightened being. And so he chose in the summer of 1957 to give very deep teachings on the nature of mind, very deep teachings on the nature of mind to general public, which was never done. It was not done. And so he was giving it to them so they would have it in case things got bad. So in a way, I felt okay about talking about this today because this is our version of that. If anybody feels frightened, if you're feeling elated, great. Reach out to somebody and recognize how bad they're feeling. And if you're feeling sad and scared, remember your own light and stay with it and help each other, because that's how we redeem ourselves and how we redeem the world, our world at least. There's a story I've referred to frequently about Hurricane Katrina and the fact that everybody had to go to one of the, everybody who had to flee the flooding went to stay at a sports stadium. And there were some people camped out in this hallway, some people camped out in that hallway, there were so many hallways, different people camped out. And there was this one hallway where the rule was, we take care of each other. That was the rule, and they enforced it. And it was the most peaceful, clean, and pleasant refugee experience that the people could ever possibly have. All these things were happening around them, but this hallway was a place of peace. So hopefully that we'll be able to repeat that for the people who are feeling scared right now. And for the people who are elated, reach out and help them, because you need to stop the fighting. recognize your common enemy is anger. Find a way. So I think I better stop talking. We've got about 10 minutes. If you want to share something about how you're thinking and how you're feeling, or how this advice to watch your mind, tame your reactions, take care of each other, and recognize we have everything we need, 3 things, if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that. So, question microphones. Thank you, sound department. Question microphones are here and here. And if nobody has a comment, we'll just sit for about 5 minutes. So let's see what we got. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for this talk.
No,
These
thank you.
pieces of advice. One thing I've been struggling with is being there to support people on a sort of micro level. Shortly after the election, I was with a friend who said that her partner is convinced that on the day of the inauguration, he's going to be killed or something terrible.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are feeling that sort of grip, and I think I've been there in the past. And so I sort of started to share what's worked for me, consuming way less news, being on my phone less, being with people, has helped me connect to the moment and realize, what, right now we're together, we're laughing. Right now things are okay. I don't know about the next moment. And the response that she gave was, well, he thinks that's complacency.
I'm sorry?
The response that she gave about her partner was, he thinks that's complacency.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I kind of stepped back and thought for a second. It was like, if 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said the exact same thing. And I just started thinking about all of, that's like the tip of the iceberg, what I said. There's got to be like a whole understanding that underlies that for you to not think it's sort of cliche or trite.
Right.
And then I thought even more, well, what could I actually do to be there? Can anything I say help, or do I just need to be here and be silent? And I don't have an answer. I guess that's kind of the question, for people who might think that the path that we are on, many of us are on, is complacency or not active enough, because that's part of the anger, I think.
I understand this, and I think that right now, for the people who are scared, this is a situation of feeling unmoored. Because there are no leaders right now articulating a path. There's no one articulating a path for the people who are scared. Or maybe they're articulating it, but it's getting drowned out in all the social media noise. I think that's going to be an incredibly important thing in the world stage, for someone to articulate things we can do to not be complacent. And in fact, I did just see there's going to be another women's march, just so you know. So it's really interesting right there. There's a difference between being informed and being overwhelmed. So what I can say is that it's good to be informed. But when we start to get overwhelmed, that's when we have to step back. Because how are we going to make good decisions about what to do next? And I think that it's more about context than it is complacency. Because sometimes if you're engaged in an argument, you can't see the solution. But if you step back from that argument for a minute and look at it, a solution may suggest itself. And that's, I think, what you could say to the person who says, well, you're just talking about, somebody else was talking to me about this once, and they just said, radical acceptance. And I'm like, yeah, but radical acceptance sounds really cruel and sort of radical, and the idea of being complacent or encouraging complacency. Because love is actually active. Love is a verb. It's something we can be active in doing, and we can support people by giving them a place to be that's safe. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that gradually, from among the people who are feeling sad and scared, ideas are going to start arising because it's all new and shocking. It's only been a few days. And so the reason I love the advice of watch your mind and don't react, because then we won't be adding to the problem, at least for a few days, right? And then we'll see what develops, because it would be wonderful if leaders could come forward to articulate these ideas of what we can do that doesn't have to do with calling the other side names, dehumanizing the other side. There's got to be a way that isn't that, because that dehumanizes us, you know? Because, I mean, I've talked about this before because I majored in words. I majored in words, journalism. I majored in words. And so I came up with a clever way of thinking about what human beings do to each other in these kinds of situations. First, they criticize, and then they ostracize, and then they marginalize, and then they demonize. And that's where the danger happens. And so we have to look at our own minds for these 4 things, because it all has to do with putting ourselves in a position of superiority when really we're all in this mess together. But I don't know what to say right now except to say gradually over time, we will find a way. I think that might be something you could say to the person who says you're being complacent. You're saying, look, right now, it's not complacent for me to control my anger. Let me tell you, it's hard work. And it's not complacent for me to feel love for everybody who's hurting right now. I'm just looking for external mechanisms, and those will arise. I'm confident of that, because human beings who are scared find ways to feel safe and to do things that help them feel safe. I wish I could give you a better answer. I feel like I haven't fully addressed your friend's question or statement, but this is a start, perhaps?
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is there something I missed?
No. That
Okay.
answers it really well, actually.
Okay.
That faith that opportunities will arise, I think, is absolutely central right now.
Right.
And I think another thing I can learn is that sometimes, rather than trying to give advice in one way or another, it's better to just be there and listen.
Yeah. I had an interview yesterday with a chaplaincy student, and that's what the interview was about. A conscious, non-judgmental presence, a supportive, to be to very subtly be present with people who are hurting, rather than trying to fix it. Sometimes it's best to let it arise from within itself. But I appreciate you asking about this. Yeah. No. Yeah. This will be the last question. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Lama Kathy.
Yeah.
As you and perhaps a couple other people may know, I've been struggling with accepting and detaching, and I feel that that's what you're talking about. So I'm going to continue to work on detachment and acceptance and compassion and taming my mind. You just show me how.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. Well, I think the first is the 3 things we talked about today are really good. The first of those is really the how. The first one is watch your mind and tame your reactions. That's something I think everybody can do. I don't think that, because I don't think there's a magic formula to watching your mind, except to do some meditation every day, and that when we train ourselves in non-reaction when we're meditating. When we're meditating and a thought arises, we may have an initial strong reaction to it. It's like, I don't want to think about that. Or, oh, that's so interesting. Maybe I can stop meditating for a minute and just think about this thing I like, So when we're meditating, that's the how for us. For us, that's the how how we can watch our mind and tame our reaction. Because when we notice we're thinking, and I don't know about you folks, but when I first learned to meditate, I thought that thinking was somehow like evil and bad, and I wasn't supposed to be doing it. So I would be really harsh with myself and really judge myself a lot. And then I found out later from my teachers that that was not helpful. That was not helpful. And that it was better to return my attention to the breath with kindness and gentleness and love, as though I was my own child, and that I was feeling, like my own Buddha nature is like my most precious child. And that's an image I came up with a while back, that we all have the capacity to awaken and be a Buddha. We all have the capacity to be a Buddha. And we have to practice, that's why we practice all the different disciplines, is so that we could become a Buddha. But if we feel like there's not very much we can do as an individual, then we can look toward our own, nurturing our own peace of mind and our own Buddha nature, nurturing it as though it were our most precious child. We wouldn't yell at our most precious child unless we needed them to be out of the street right now because that car's coming. But we wouldn't yell. We would be firm, but we wouldn't yell. You see this idea of, yes, of course there's extremity. Yelling is important. It's part of training of being a parent, right? But there's still how we would prefer to be with ourselves, which would be gentle and kind toward ourselves. Maybe other people in our lives were not gentle and kind with us, and then we internalize those voices. So we have a lot to learn to go through and to work past the negative voices of others from our life in the past. Maybe someone in our life yelled at us when we were small, and it made it very difficult for us to have equilibrium and to comfort ourselves. It made it really difficult. But if we now get a chance to parent ourselves again, I don't know if anybody told you this, if this is news to you, I'm glad to be the bringer of this news. As the bumper sticker says, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. So the idea is that we can parent ourselves in a positive way now, just one step at a time. And for me, that's the how, is parenting myself one step at a time by observing my thoughts and taking action. The action is the best action. You can read Pema Chodron's book, Start Where You Are, and she gives you chapters and verses on various methods of coming to equilibrium internally. So hopefully that will be a good start for some folks. And so Start Where You Are is a very valuable book in that regard. But I think the other thing is that, to quote an old rock and roll song, we have to be ready to not be fooled again. We won't get fooled again. And we're not going to get fooled by people who tell us that hate is good. We're not going to be fooled by people who tell us that hurting others is the way to do things. We're not going to get fooled by that. And when we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, as my friends in 12 Steps say, we're going to be ready to make a change. So hopefully this will happen. May this happen for all of us. Now, because of time, we'll have to stop here. But I really appreciate the questions that were asked, and I hope that the answers give us a start, And we will take care of each other, okay? That's what we do in this homeroom of the High School of Life, is we take care of each other. So let's sit quietly for just a moment and let our minds come to rest, and then we'll dedicate the goodness of our session. It'll just be a minute. Thank you. Because of the shortness of time, we'll just recite the dedication in English today. It's on the back of the sheet. It begins with the words, by this merit. Think that we dedicate this session and all the good things we have ever done and will ever do to the freedom from suffering of all beings and the quelling of all disputes and hatred. So we'll start with the words, by this merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all this virtue. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you to the sound department. Appreciate it. And if anybody is in this room is going on the field trip this afternoon, could you please stay behind? I'd like to talk to you, okay? Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Om Mani Padme Hum.